Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my August wrap up. So in the month of August, I felt like I was quite slumpy. It turns out that I wasn't. I didn't do a mid-month wrap-up in August like I usually do because at that point in the month, I had only read 2 books. The reason for that is that my very first book of the month was extremely large and a little bit slow-paced. However, it turns out that overall, I didn't actually do too bad in August. I read 8 books in total, and page count-wise, I've actually had 3 months where I've read less pages than I did in August. So overall, for the amount I read, August was pretty average. For the quality of the books that I read, everything was pretty good. I only had 2 books that were below 4 stars. One of them was a 1 star, which we will get to a little bit later in this video, and I'm not looking forward to talking about it, but yeah, let's get started with some stats. So in the month of August, I read a total of 3,374 pages, which breaks down to an average of 109 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 1 1-star book, 1 3-star, 4 4-stars, and 2 5-stars, which breaks down to an average of a 3.75 rating per book. For the demographics, I read 3 young adult, 1 new adult, and 4 adult books. For the formats, we had 6 standardly formatted novels, 1 novella, and 1 arc. For the genres, we had 5 fantasy, 1 dystopian, 1 science fiction, and 1 thriller. And finally, from the places where I sourced these books from, 5 of them are books that I've hauled in 2020. 2 of them are from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2020, and 1 of them I received from a publisher. So the first book that I read in the month of August was actually a novella, and that was The Dawn Chorus by Samantha Shannon. This is installment 3.5 in the bonus season series, which is a whole mix of genres. It's a fantasy, dystopian, science fiction series that takes place in a futuristic London, where we follow our main character Paige, who is a clairvoyant in a world where it is illegal to be clairvoyant. So this series kicks off where Paige is taking a train to her father's and she has to use her ability to defend herself, and then her powers are discovered and she gets arrested and taken away to this place that really throws open the world. I don't like to say any more about this series than that because the whole book just really takes a turn into something that is not described on the synopsis and something that is very unexpected. So I read the novella because I am a co-host for the Bonathon, which is a read-along that was created by Ashley from Frolic Through Fiction, and we did start this read-along last year and we finished it up in, I think it was January or February. However, with the novella being released, we did come back together and have a little discussion about it, and we will also be having another live show discussing the 4th book when it's released in February next year. So the main focus in this novella was trauma and recovery. The 3rd book in this series is very, very bleak. There is not one happy thing that happens to any of the characters in the 3rd book. It is like a whole bleak experience reading that book, and this novella follows the repercussions of the events of the 3rd book and how the main character is dealing with them, how the things that have happened to her are going to have a lasting impact on her. We also follow another main character in this novella who is with Paige at this time, and the novella is also told in 2 timelines. So we have the present day while she's trying to recover, and also flashbacks to the very first book. So I gave this one 4 stars. If you guys have been on my channel for any length of time, you will know that I don't typically like short things. I do like to read novellas because they do tie into a larger body of work and they give you a little bit more insight. It's not necessarily integral to what is happening in the core books, but just gives you a little bit more information. You can understand the characters and the story a little bit deeper. So because it was short, it didn't really have a plot or anything, and I wasn't overly thrilled because, like the 3rd book in this series, this was very, very bleak, although it did have some moments of hope and there were a couple of lighter moments in there. It did make me laugh a couple of times. The 2 characters that are in this novella, one of them is one of my favorite characters from the series, so I did enjoy that. I don't know, I just didn't feel like I could give it 5 stars. It's a novella. I don't think it was necessary. Like, I don't think you have to read this one. It is just if you want a little bit of deeper knowledge of the characters. It was good, it was well written, it was sad. 4 stars. I enjoyed it. So the chunky book that took me forever was Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This is the final book in the Farseer trilogy, and it is the 3rd book from my book club, Catch Up Book Club, who are reading the entire Realm of the Elderlings, and we did have a live show on this at the beginning of August. So the Farseer trilogy follows a young boy called Fitzchivalry Farseer, who is 6 right at the beginning of the series, and he's 16 or 17 by the time we get to the end of this trilogy. Fitz is the bastard son of the king in waiting, and when he is a very small child, his maternal grandfather drops him off at the door to the keep and says that it's time for him to go back to his father. However, Prince Chivalry hears word that Fitz is now returning to Bookkeep, which is the seat of the crown, and he then decides to abdicate the throne and leave so that he doesn't have to deal with his son. Now this leaves Fitz in a very strange predicament because nobody really knows what to do with him. So he's pretty much raised by the stable master until the king decides that Fitz is going to be trained as an assassin, because he's in a very unique position where he is of the royal family, but he's also one of the common people. I gave this one 5 stars. It is both my favorite in the trilogy, but also the one that I have the most critical issues with, I guess. This book is 838 pages, and the first 300 pages of this were such a drag to read. Now, the main bulk of this, especially like the last 400 pages, was so good because we get to learn about the Elderlings in here, because this entire like extended series that Robin Hobb has is called The Realm of the Elderlings. However, for most of this trilogy, the Elderlings are kind of in the background and they're mentioned occasionally as part of the legends of the world, but they're not really in the books because this is a very character driven series from the perspective of somebody who has his own things going on in life. So this book had a lot more of the magical elements than any other book in the series has had, and we also learned a lot about the Elderlings. It is mainly a traveling book. There is a lot of travel in here, but some of the side characters that were introduced I absolutely loved, especially Kettle and also Starling, although Starling did annoy me in a couple of parts with the way that she was behaving, but Kettle, especially at the point where she's introduced, I absolutely loved her. I think the way that Robin Hobb brought this series together was very well done. There are several plot lines running through here. We have a magical plot line, we have Fitz's kind of personal plot line, and we also have a political war plot line where the coasts of the 6 duchies are being raided by the Red Ship Raiders, and the royalty are trying to figure out how to solve this. So in some ways the conclusion of this trilogy was a little bit rushed in that it focused a lot on some elements and then wrapped up others really quickly, but that kind of followed the pattern of the series as a whole, where we do have this Red Ship Raider plotline going on, but there are other more catastrophic things going on. It's just they don't seem as important at the time. So yeah, I know a few people did think that the ending was rushed, but I did just really like how this all came together. My main issue with this, like I said, is those first 300 pages. However, it is swings and roundabouts, because without those 300 pages, this book would not have been as impactful and as meaningful, because we wouldn't have had that time spent with Fitz and really understanding what he's going through and how he's feeling. However, that does not make those 300 pages any more enjoyable to read when you are in the moment. The next book that I read was my 1-star read of the month, and that was Infinity Son by Adam Silvera. I've already ranted about this in my reading vlog, so I will link that for you because I probably went into more depth there than I'm going to here. But this is the first book in a young adult fantasy series. It is Adam Silvera's debut fantasy, and it follows 2 brothers called Emil and Brighton. Now, this is set in New York City, so it's like a contemporary fantasy, but in this world we have celestials and spectres. They're all superheroes, but celestials got their power not necessarily naturally, but they were kind of gifted with their power, and the spectres have taken their power by drinking the blood of mythical legendary creatures that are not mythical and legendary in here, but they are like hydras and phoenixes that to us as non-magical beings in a sadly non-magical world see as legendary. So the characters of Brighton and Emil. Emil is the good guy, he's a vegan, he's really into phoenixes, and he's generally an all-round just like pretty decent guy. And then we have Brighton, who is a content creator. Now when Brighton and Emil were kids, they wanted to be celestials and their powers never manifested. So Brighton now has a YouTube channel where he makes videos about the celestials, and he's always wanting his big break like he wants to go viral like all the time, and essentially because other people are better than him or luckier than him, he's very bitter, he's very entitled, he thinks he deserves all of this stuff that he apparently isn't getting, to the point where he's not grateful for the things that he does have. And I don't like him. I don't like either of them really, but I don't like Brighton because he is insufferable. So in this book, one of the brothers does manifest powers, which gets him dragged into this war between the Celestials and the Spectres, because there's other stuff going on as well in the background of the superhero people, and the other brother is also dragged along for the ride. So I pretty much had quite a few problems with this. As you can imagine, I gave it 1 star. There were only 2 characters that I liked in here, one of which we occasionally got to read from the perspective of, which was Maribel. The writing style for the voices of Brighton and Emil was this very forced, like cool kid type of talk, and it felt very much like an adult trying to imagine how teenagers talk, but realistically it's not how the average teenager talks, I want to say. So I didn't like that. Now that is something that is common through Adam Silvera, but I can kind of overlook it or not mind it as much in his contemporary, which I do actually enjoy. But in this, it was just a little bit insufferable because apart from that, the other characters who didn't have this voice, Maribel being one of them, and also the rest of the Celestials, all had pretty much the same voice. It was very hard for me to distinguish between the Celestials. I got 310 pages into this. Now Maribel, the one that I mentioned I like, is the main one of the Celestials in this book, and I got over 300 pages in and realized that I did not remember what her superpower was because everything is just kind of glossed over. None of these Celestials feel very distinct from each other. They all seem to talk the same, and every time one was on the page I had to like consciously reassess what I knew about them to try and like remember which one it was, but it was very, very difficult. I found the writing to just generally not be great. In places it was a little bit lazy. The characters didn't really develop. There's a plot twist at the end of this that I wouldn't have even considered a plot twist if I hadn't been reading Goodreads reviews where people were talking about a plot twist at the end, because the characters of Brighton and Emil do not grow at all throughout the course of this novel. So one of the actions of one of the characters at the end of this book that's supposed to be so shocking was literally exactly on brand for this character. It was exactly something that he would do, and I was completely unsurprised when he actually did it. I also didn't feel like the plot points had a lot of groundwork laid for them in here. Everything was kind of obvious or pulled out of nowhere, so there would be a reveal and there'd been no groundwork earlier in the book to set up this reveal, and then a character would just pop in and be like, oh yeah, I knew this information all along, I just never told you, and now I'm going to give you a little bit of insight, kind of like a villain monologue but from the protagonist and repeatedly throughout the book. But yeah, I just really did not have a good time with this. I don't think it's a well-crafted fantasy novel at all. Like I said, do really enjoy Adam Silvera's contemporary work, but I don't think that fantasy is a genre for him, sadly. Yeah, I won't be continuing with this series. The next book I finished was actually my favorite of the month, which I'm quite surprised about, and that is Vengeful by V. Schwab. So this is the sequel to Vicious, and based on all of the reviews that I've heard of this book, I fully went into it expecting not to like it as much as I enjoyed Vicious, and I was really surprised. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. So the villain's duology is an adult science fiction duology, and Vicious follows Victor and Eli. The book is told in 2 timelines, so we have the present day and also 10 years in the past. The past timeline follows Victor and Eli as they are college students and best friends as they are working towards finding out how extraordinaries are created, extraordinaries being people with superpowers. They quickly discover that to gain extraordinary abilities you have to have a near-death experience, so they proceed to kill themselves and each other to bring themselves back from the dead and gain these abilities. Now flash forward 10 years into the future, and Victor is just getting out of prison and he has a score to settle with Eli as they are now mortal enemies. So the sequel to this is a little bit different. We have the introduction of some extra characters. We do have all of the characters but one from the first book in this sequel, and then we also have the introduction of a couple of new characters, Marcella and June. Now June has some very mysterious circumstances surrounding her, and I think that she's actually going to be relevant to the eventual 3rd book in this series, and I do have a very strong theory about who she may actually be. And I did buddy read this with Jade as well. We're working through all of V. Schwab's books together, and Jade also thinks the same as me, so I'm very excited for the 3rd book in this series whenever it may be released. But we also had the character of Marcella in this, who was just such a badass woman with so much agency. I absolutely adored her. She is the wife of a gangster, and this book starts off where her husband tries to kill her. She doesn't quite die, so she does turn into an EO, and she is hell-bent on revenge and essentially obliterating men, and she is just phenomenal. I absolutely adored her. So this series does have a lot of grim morality in it. As you can imagine, we are following villains. Some of them are more horrific than others. I do really like all of them, honestly. Victor and Eli, I love them. I love them both. Now, one of them is definitely a lot worse than the other one, but there are elements of their character that I still really love, even though they're terrible. But I think one of the reasons why I really love this series is that it just has themes of revenge. Like, everybody has a score to settle with somebody else, and honestly, just them being so driven to go to the lengths that they go to, we have to stand. I think I enjoyed this one more than Vicious because I feel like the plot was stronger in here. It was a lot more complex. We had all of these characters with their own agendas and their own motives that were somehow tied together in some way, and V. Schwab did a really good job of bringing everything together into a cohesive plot despite it having all of these threads. Aside from that, I just feel like it is a very compelling read. Both books in this series are. They are a breeze to fly through. They are so entertaining. I absolutely love the characters, and I just really loved Vengeful. And yeah, the third book in the series, which I didn't know existed until I finished this one, is definitely left open for a third one, and I do believe a third one is coming, and I cannot wait. I'm surprised by how much I love this book, honestly, but it was a blast. And also, as you guys may be able to imagine, there are trigger warnings for self-harm and suicide in this series. The next book that I read was Bone Crier's Moon by Catherine Purdy. This is a young adult fantasy that follows two girls who are bone criers, which means that they are tasked with ferrying the spirits of the dead to the gates of heaven and hell, and a boy called Bastion who has a score to settle with the bone criers because his father was killed by one. So the two females we follow in this book are Alice and Sabine. Alice is going to be the next matriarch of the bone criers, and the bone criers have to go through a series of tasks before they can begin to ferry the spirits of the dead. The first thing they have to do is kill 3 animals to claim their graces, and they wear the bones of the animals on pieces of jewelry. So like, if you kill a bird, you will have enhanced vision and enhanced perception and things like that. After they've done that, they have to play the siren song on a flute on a bridge on the full moon to lure their soulmate to them, and they then have to kill their soulmate before the end of a 1-year period before they can actually be bone criers. So this book starts off where Alice is playing her siren song to lure her soulmate so that she can perform the final ritual before she becomes a bone crier. Enter Bastion, who has been lingering by bridges waiting for a bone crier to play the siren song so that he can kill her and avenge his father, and he comes onto the bridge when Alice is playing, pretends to be her soulmate, and they start to fight. However, they then come to a little bit of a stalemate because the thought enters their minds that as Bastion turned up on the bridge and nobody else did, maybe he actually is her soulmate, which means that he can't actually kill her, because if he does, then he will also die. So instead of killing her, Bastion kidnaps her, which is when Sabine becomes relevant because she is Alice's best friend. However, she doesn't really want to be a bone crier. She doesn't enjoy killing, so she only has 1 grace bone. However, she is hell-bent on getting her best friend back from her captors, so she sets off to rescue Alice, and in the process of this get her remaining grace bones so that she is stronger. Now, I gave this one 3 stars. I liked it, but I didn't love it. This is pretty big for a young adult fantasy. It's 480 pages, and considering its length, I don't really think too much happened. Aside from the beginning conflict, which happens in the first 50 pages between Alice and Bastion, there are 2 other main events in this book. But I remember being 200 pages into this, and I was only coming up to the first point of action. It's interesting because I don't feel particularly attached to any of the characters in this book. However, the 200 pages between the first conflict and the next conflict, nothing is really happening apart from character development, so it's interesting that I don't actually feel too attached to the characters. I feel like it was kind of long-winded. It's hard to say because I wasn't necessarily bored while I was reading this, but then nothing really happened. It's an interesting plot structure as well. It's not quite like other fantasies that I typically read, in that the plot of this book is not to overcome an enemy. me or anything like that. It's more of the characters' individual personal journeys. There is a romance in here as well. It is fantasy romance, but I feel like because the characters weren't working to defeat someone or something, or working to overthrow anything, I just didn't really feel like anything happened, and then I felt like the final conflict was a little bit overwhelming. I did really enjoy Catherine Purdy's writing style in here though. I found it to be very readable but not overly plain, and I did like the setting of this book, which is a roughly historical French setting, and a lot of it does take place in woodlands. There's a lot of descriptions and talk about animals in here. Also, content warning in here for animal deaths. Nothing that bothers me, and animal deaths are one of the things that I'm mainly bothered by in books, but the bone criers do kill animals to take their bones, so be wary of that if you are sensitive to it. But yeah, overall I liked it. I didn't love it. Not sure at this point whether I will continue with the sequel to this, but I'm kind of sad that I didn't love this because I really love the cover. The synopsis sounded really interesting, but yeah, I only liked it. Then I read 3/5 by John Vircher. This is a review copy that was sent to me to review for you guys by Pushkin Press, so thank you so much to Pushkin for sending this my way. The release date on this in the UK is the 4th of October, and if you are in the US, you can already get your hands on this one. So this is an adult thriller, I want to say. It does say on the press release and on Goodreads that it is a thriller. I would say it's more general fiction with a little bit of suspense, but this follows a biracial man called Bobby who is in his early 20s. He is half black, however he is white passing, and he's never told anybody that his father is black, and his father isn't in the picture, so it's not like anybody would know unless he told them. This is set in 1995 at the same time that the O.J. Simpson trial is going on, and also at the same time as the LA riots, and it follows Bobby as his childhood best friend has just gotten out of jail, but he is a newly converted white supremacist. On the night of Aaron's release, him and Bobby are hanging out when Aaron assaults a black boy with a brick. So we follow three perspectives in here, the main one being Bobby, as he deals with the guilt of being witness to his best friend assaulting a young black boy and then just driving away. We also follow Bobby's mother, Isabel, who is a recovering alcoholic. She's trying to stay on the wagon, but she's struggling a lot, and we learn about her past and also her current situations in here. And the third perspective we follow is a black doctor who works at the hospital where the young boy that Aaron assaulted has been taken to. So this is mainly a book about racism. It is about being black in this time. It's hard because Bobby doesn't identify as black, he just ignores the fact that he is half black. But one of the reasons for this is because of the racial prejudice of the time and the way that people would view him if they knew he was black. He's also extremely worried in case his best friend, who's now a white supremacist, does actually realize that he's black, and he's scared how he will react, especially because Bobby knows what he did, and if the police find out about what Aaron did, then he will end up back in jail. I will say that I enjoyed the perspectives of Isabel and the black doctor more than I enjoyed the perspective of Bobby in here up until we got to the end, just because Bobby's chapters tended to focus on the guilt of what he'd done and what he was going to do about that, while Isabel and Robert were both kind of progressing towards something. And I will say that there is a lot of suspense in this book, especially for the Isabel and Doctor chapters. I was just flicking through pages because I knew what they were trying to work up to, and I just wanted them to get there to see how each of the characters would react to what was going on in their perspectives. But what I will say about this is that the ending was so sad. I nearly shed a tear. It was very shocking. It was very upsetting. A lot of this book is hard to read because, as you can imagine, it focuses on racism. There is a lot of racist language in here, including the N-word, so content warning for that. But there is also themes of homophobia in here and homophobic language, and there is also at least one instance of ableist language in here as well. As well as that, we have trigger warnings for rape and suicide in here. So this book dealt with a lot of difficult, heavy topics, but I do think that it really did a good job of illustrating the time period that it was in. Some of the characters in here are absolutely awful, and they were just awful to read about, but I did find it interesting reading about the lives of these people and how the actions of one person can affect so many lives in all of these ripples outward. So yeah, I would say that this is a difficult read. I can't really say it was enjoyable to read it because a lot of it was difficult to read and the ending was very upsetting, but if anything I've said about this this sounds interesting, then I would definitely recommend that you pick this up. And then finally, the last book that I read in August was Girls of Storm and Shadow by Natasha Nyan. This was also a gift from Kimberly, so thank you so much, Kimberly, for sending this my way. So this is the sequel to Girls of Paper and Fire, which is a young adult East Asian fantasy that follows a girl called Lei who is taken from her home and forced to be a paper girl, which is a concubine to the king. Now there are 3 castes in this world. We have the Moon caste, who are at the top, and they are demons. We then have the Steel caste, who are part human, part demon, and they're normally like the servants and the merchants of the world. And then the bottom caste is the paper caste, and they are humans. So Lei is forcibly taken from her home to be this paper girl. This series deals heavily with sexual assault. The first book has some quite graphic scenes of sexual assault in it, so please be wary of that if you're going into this series. And the second book mainly deals with the repercussions of the first book, as well as trauma and recovery. So I did actually really enjoy this. I gave it 4 stars. I wasn't sure if I would, because I think if I read Girls of Paper and Fire now, I would give it maybe 3 stars instead of 4. However, I do really enjoy Natasha Nyan's writing style. I find these books to be incredibly well written, and one thing that I really love about this series is the atmosphere. I really love the world that Natasha Nyan has created. I especially love the Steel cast and how they are depicted, because they are mostly human-like with a couple of animalistic features. So they may have scales on parts of their skin, or they may have ears of the animal demon form that they are descended from. I think one thing that was missing from this book for me that I really enjoyed about the first book was the chemistry between the main character and the love interest. It's kind of understandable with where the plot goes in this book and the themes that are running through this book, but it is something that I missed generally because it was one of my favorite elements of the first book. Aside from that, I did find this one to be a little bit of a filler. It is kind of typical of the second book in young adult fantasy series. The only real plot in this is that the characters are traveling from place to place to accomplish something at each place that they visit, and so the main of this book was about expansion of the world and also character development. The expansion of the world aspect I absolutely loved. However, the character development, I don't love the main characters in this series. I don't really love Lei. I do like her, but I much prefer the side characters in here, especially Bo and Nitta, and also a character called Lova who was introduced a little bit later on, were my favorite characters in this book. But there is actually quite a bit of grey morality in here that I also appreciated, and how to do something, to accomplish things, sometimes you have to do something that goes against what you believe in, or you have to do things that you wouldn't normally do to accomplish a greater goal, I want to say. So I did enjoy a lot about this, enough for it to get 4 stars, and I was a little bit unsure about picking this one up, with me thinking that maybe if I read Girls of Paper and Fire now, I wouldn't rate it as high. However, this has renewed my faith in this series. I really enjoyed it, and I will definitely be picking up the final book in this series next year. So that is it. Those are the 8 books that I read in the month of August. I think I did pretty well, actually. I don't know, I just felt really slumpy, but 8 books ain't bad. Please let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them, and also please let me know how your August went. Did you read a lot? Did you feel slumpy? But that is about it for this video, guys, so please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're a go when nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.